This is The Conversation, and we're on episode 3, still dealing with Know Thyself, one of the most basic but perhaps important confrontation of our lifetime when we explore the meaningfulness of our existence. So in episode 2, we came across the dangers of existentialism, which we met in episode 1 as we were trying to do the confrontation. And we also came across the Newtonian worldview, where we tried to marry, or rather where we saw how the Newtonian worldview marries empiricism and rationalism. And then we went ahead and looked at the human psyche. And today I'm with Rendani as we continue with this conversation. Rendani, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Now let's, do a little review of what we saw regarding the human psyche in episode 2. Could you give us a review where we talked about the consciousness of the mind?
Yeah, maybe I will start by saying part of the reason why we started talking about the psyche as in the quest to try and figure out ourselves.
Yes.
In fact, it's obvious that we have to at least look at the psychology, because psychology is the study of mental processes.
Yes.
Most so is because of their species, or the remnant of rationalism in the science was that the world is a world of objects and we are the subject. And now that has some psychological implications, because that if we view the world as a world of objects and us as just the subject, then it isolates us from the world. And maybe we might even have difficulties in trying to incorporate ourselves in the world and see the world in a better light. So which is why we tapped into the science of psychology in an attempt to understand the mental processes of the person, not just how the person views the world, but as to how he assimilates this world and make meaning out of it. And
sort of relates
exactly
and has experience out of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we couldn't leave that out, because if we then just look at the world as a world of objects and we as the subject, we will not really find the answers as to what is going on with us. And part of the reason also why we talked about existentialism is because they were concerned with the existence of their own selves and their subjective experience.
Yeah.
So last episode we did talk about the psyche, although we did not go deeper into it, but we talked about two most important guys, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. I believe these are the fathers of modern day psychology, as it were. As I said earlier in episode 2, that Sigmund Freud is seen today as the father of psychoanalysis and as one that has changed the way we view ourselves. So he's quite an important man, despite the fact that his life wasn't very much good, because he was a cocaine addict for 10 years and also he was anti-God. But well, anyway, we could still learn something from him. That's a good thing about it. So now we said that Freud looked at the world, or at least looked at the mind, as divided. And he was challenging at least the view that the mind is a one thing, is just the thinking thing that is out there, as Descartes proposed.
All right.
So he was like, really? Is the mind really just one thing?
Oh, so the mind was just regarded as just one thing, which did not have any particular processes and perhaps states and things like that. It was just uniform.
It was just uniform. It was a thinking thing, as it were. So that's why Freud became the one to popularize the idea of the unconscious, because then he said, well, can we really be sure that the mind is just one thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I think he was motivated. I'm not sure about that, but I think anyone should be aware that sometimes in their head they hear more than one voices, right? I think that's what led Freud to discover the unconscious, because in the voice sometimes you hear contradicting voices.
Absolutely. And then you say, my first voice told me this, and then but my second voice tells me the other
exactly.
thing.
Some like to take it to the extreme and say that there's an angel on your side and there's a devil on your side, and they fight it out and then you stand with the winner. So yeah, but it's something that we cannot really ignore, which is why I think that it's important that we look at psychology, because the fact of the matter is that we know that there isn't one voice in our head, and we have to then try and find out what is going on there, despite the fact that how is it that we perceive. We talked about consciousness, that it is something that is not understood even by the brightest scientists, but then at least we can try and see what are the processes that are involved in our own mind. And as we explore that, maybe we can somehow get close into understanding how it is that we are conscious. So now Freud thought of the the mind, divided the mind into three compartments.
Yeah.
There was the conscious, which is the resident of the ego, and there was the pre-conscious, which was the gatekeeper between the conscious and the unconscious. So three components. And I think the conscious is the ego, and the pre-conscious was then the unconscious was the id, and then the pre-conscious was the gatekeeper that closed up the content that was in the conscious not to surface. So you are a person right now, as we see,
Yeah.
and you believe yourself to be in this way.
Yes, I'm Kananelo.
Maybe you're this reserved person, but maybe you've got
And I love mango.
exactly. But maybe you've got this wild side of you,
Yes.
which you do not really allow to surface, especially if you are among a particular group of people.
Yes, I need to keep my tie straight.
Exactly. So now that was the function of the pre-conscious that suppressed or kept the gatekeeper, kept the gate between the unconscious and the pre-conscious. But Freud went on to say that, listen, no matter how much the pre-conscious is working to close the gate, sometimes part of your unconscious or the content of the unconscious can surface in dreams or as a slippery of the tongue. I remember in episode 2 we talked about a situation where if you are used to cursing and you suppress it when you're in certain places, but it will just come.
Yes,
So
and you don't know what happened. You're just like, oh my Lord,
I can't believe it. You can't even apologize. Exactly. So now he would say, now that's you. That's your other personality, because he viewed the mind as having sub-personalities.
Okay.
And those sub-personality, it is as though they had an autonomous power and that they could possess you, as it were. And I don't think Freud's idea was new in that sense, because the Greeks spoke of these emotion as an autonomous being also. They thought of humans actually as the playthings of the gods. You see, so for instance, that's why in the Roman time you had, for instance, lust, drunkenness deified. There was a god of drunkenness and there was a god of lust, and these are human emotion. But you wonder why would it that they would parallel these with a deity? It's because of they saw the power which they possessed. Because a man can be possessed to lust, that he wants nothing but just to lust. For instance, your tempestuous sexual power, it would be deified. There was a god of sex for the reason, because if a man wants to have sex, for instance, if a woman wants to have sex, she's nothing but that. She just becomes singular, that she wants to do just that. So now no wonder then the Greeks would think of man as a plaything for the gods, because it seems as though that deep within man are some things which have control over him. Something like you would say spirits.
So in other words, he is talking about the power that consumes a person in that particular, shall I say, mindset?
Yes.
Or time?
Yes.
Or rather the relative time period at which this person is thinking about this.
Exactly.
And this is taking full control, so to speak, of them. And perhaps, like we saw in episode 2, maybe even sometimes out of character.
Exactly.
As we shall put it,
exactly, because now we don't know which one is the character. Maybe that's the you. Well, but we don't want that, of course.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is very right, because then, if then these emotional states that resides in our mind can take over us and maybe for a particular time manifest continually without us having control, what then do we call that? Then I think that then backs the spiritual explanation as to what that is exactly. But of course, because mind and matter are separated, and then if we are looking at matter, then we would rather shut out the spiritual realm. So psychology is trying to understand that without an intervention of the spiritual side, as to maybe these are just merely biochemical processes that are taking place in the brain. If you are hungry, you could be taken off by hunger, right?
And do anything to get that plate of food.
Do anything to get that plate of food. So it's like you're taken by that hunger. But we could just say then, well, that is just a neurological activity that's taking place in your brain, or we could say that you are possessed, as it were. So now, these psychologists were trying to explore such kind of things, and then you can imagine the difficulty that they had to encounter. So now we've just explained the structure of Freudian psyche, that he thought that this is the psyche, and he was trying to explain that then This is why it is that we can have multiple voices, because we've got sub-personality, just to bring it home.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that this is it, that we can have these people talking in our brain, and then one thing then manifest in the end. But whereas we look so calm here sitting, but there is tempestuous conflict of thought that is going on in the unconscious. So that's why he was trying to explain the multiplicity of voices in our head.
All right, so if we do get what you're saying, you're like, we have the conscious,
Yes.
and then we have the pre-conscious, and then we have the unconscious. Now the pre-conscious is trying to be as a gatekeeper, where we have, shall we say, a lot of information that is deposited into our subconscious.
Yes.
And in most cases, it's us being unaware of it, because if it's the unconscious, simply means that we are not aware of it. We're not conscious.
We're
of
not
it
conscious
as,
of it.
as it were. And then we had the consciousness, which perhaps this is the state where we know ourselves. Like, I know I'm Kanano, I do this. This is what resides in my consciousness. And I feel that it is where I can, or rather I have confidence.
Exactly, and make sound judgment.
And make sound judgment.
Exactly.
But then there are this characteristics, or this times or states that come where we shall normally say it's out of character, and then they surface, but then maybe they surface continually, or they surface in ways that is very prevalent, and perhaps it's not something that is entirely out of the realm.
Yes,
it is
yes.
something that is actually in our subconscious from some information
That we have consumed.
That we have consumed at some point.
Exactly.
All right.
So that's what happens. So now also what the pre-conscious does is that as these things surfaces, things which you consider not to be you, for instance, what it does, then it acts like a judge. You know, like, you are bad. You are bad. If you ever look at that woman and you lust over her, you are a bad person. You're a bad person. You are bad. Don't even think about it. And this is why most of us would then always shy away and shrink. And which is why that some people are against religion for that reason, because religion tend to strengthen, for instance, what the Freud called the super ego. That is actually the judge, the punisher, that says that you are bad. You are bad. If you do this, remember what Jesus Christ said. For example, in Christianity, if you look upon a woman you lust over, if you do that, then you are bad. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's this the particular. See, so the laws, I think themselves, especially the laws of religion, tend to produce a tyrannical superego that one would surface most of their things which they would rather do, but they would not do them because of they don't want to be criticized by their superego. So now, the danger in there is that if you, for instance, are falling in a particular religion that strengthens that superego to a point that there's a lot of things that you want to do, but you can't, because you feel that you are judged by this other voice that is in your head, then it might be that that religion, I don't want to say false, but it's not a good religion at all.
If I do get what you're saying, like maybe some of the people, some of my people, some of the religious do's and don'ts that strengthen the superego, as you said, is it that they just make us, or rather they would make one conscious of the bad more than the next person? So we take a religious person, we take someone who's not religious. Someone who's religious, they have this code of conduct, so to speak, that is constantly referring them to the do's and don'ts, and therefore their conscience is aware of the do's and don'ts. Therefore they're more judgmental on the things they do. Is that what you mean, perhaps?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Because now the fact that you are conscious of these things, right, which means you've got a stronger judge, right? But and I'm not saying that it's completely bad that one should not have a judge, but you should know that this critical judge is not always right. In fact, I think, let me bring this to my own personal experience. I think one should live in a point where they think that they are free to do anything, but they cannot because it's not wise. Rather than to perceive a tyrannical superego that will crush them if they don't, then they live under fear. So their experiences or what they do is not so much because of they love what they do, it's because of they are fearful of the judge.
I see.
You see, and false religion has a tendency to produce such kind of thing where you have an obedient person that is obedient because of they are fearful of the judge.
Not so much that they find pleasure or they find wisdom in obedience.
Exactly.
And they see the goodness that could come out of it to enhance and edify their lives.
Exactly. So you have religions which are just strict. If you do this, then you get this. If you do this, then you must be beaten. If you do this, your hand must be cut off. You see, as much that has a lesson in it. But if that is how you act out your religion, it might be that you have no pleasure in those things. That's why you find that most people that are raised maybe in a religious home, they go to university, they meet a professor of psychology or sociology, they ask them of a question that just opens up everything that was hidden and surface, and they become this bad person.
Relatively in their
realm,
reference.
In their reference. It's like they become this really bad person, and then they want nothing to do with religion. They hate the religion because no, this person all along they have not really been exercising maybe their religion in a very right way. They have been doing what they were doing because of fear.
All right. So they have not been in a state where they freely exercise their will.
Exactly.
And explore, is this good? Is this bad? Is this good for me? Or am I doing this because it's good? Or am I doing this because I'm fearful?
Exactly.
And maybe I haven't even been in a situation where I actually do explore in order to find out.
Exactly. So they have not thought it out analytically, as Renee would suggest that we should do. They've not really thought out. So one, I think then, because we're talking about, just to maybe get a structure, we're talking about the voices in our head, and we're talking about what Freud says that these voices might be. And now, maybe the best way then to approach any situation, ask yourself, for instance, why don't you drink alcohol? You know?
Don't.
Yeah, is it because of you are fearful of what you might be perceived as? Or is it because of it wastes your money? And that's a good reason enough. You know, people, you can just say, I'm going to stop drinking because it wastes my money. I'm going to stop. You see, that's a reason at least.
Yeah.
Rather than to say, I wonder what it tastes like. And then the super ego will say, if you dare try it today,
you are the worst.
You are the worst person. You are not a religious man at all. You see, so I think that's where it happens. And this battle really happens in their mind.
Yeah.
And I think for one to have a good experience, at least with laws, because now we are introducing the ideas of laws and the do's and the don'ts.
Yes.
Because of that, now we are trying to bring the whole aspect of laws, because we are moral beings, as it were. There are certain things, whether we are religious or not religious, it is as though there is something embedded within the psyche that there are things that are wrong. And sometimes
even sometimes without having the reference, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes we grow up in communities where we have a code of conduct, whether it's the moral code of conduct from religious aspect or even from the law itself.
Yes.
But then there's always this thing that we check against.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes some of those are very prevalent in our lives, but some of them is just like, I know that it's wrong to kill.
Yeah.
Even before the police come, even before a religious figure comes, even before anyone comes, I know that it's bad to kill. I know that it's bad to hurt someone.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why psychology came to the scene was because of the Cartesian worldview was not answering to that, because then we were manipulating a gigantic machines, but
we were not answering as to how do we deal, or where does this consciousness of morality come from?
Exactly. What is the conduct? Even in the manipulation of this machine, how should we handle this machine?
Where the ethics?
Exactly. Where the ethics? Because if we go all in science without the ethics and without the morality, then we might even get to a point where the innovations of the scientific technology or the technology which we produce is detrimental to ourselves.
Yes.
After all, then we might even start to augment ourselves with certain machines and gadgets in order to enhance the machinery, because we ourselves could be just an object amongst many. You see, so now I think the fact that we have moved from the scientific worldview. In fact, psychology is also a science, or engineering. I think psychology is more engineering because it's human engineering, tries to figure out the processes that happens in the human psyche.
Yes.
So we've moved from the science, and now we are in engineering, the human engineering. It's very important that we've done that, because I think we have to know at least what is the best way to act in this world, rather than to say what is the best way to view this world.
That is quite interesting.
Yeah, because we not only are we viewing, but we are exploring, and we are doing things to it, even to ourselves. So I think it's important that we should know how are we supposed to do this, and how are we supposed to handle ourselves. So that was Freud in an attempt to explain the voices that are in our heads. I don't think I've went deeper enough. In fact,
yeah. You know, I don't want to cut this off. This is quite interesting, and I do hope we get time to actually talk about it further.
Yeah.
But I want to take us back to what we came across in episode 2.
Yeah.
Where we saw that what exists in the subconscious mind, it is so powerful that it supersedes, or rather it opens, or it overrides the preconscious way, and therefore it opens the gates, and then it manifests itself, or rather it goes into the conscious, and then it manifests itself in the things that we do.
Yes.
Right? And then we come across this situation where we say, but why? That was so out of character. Why would someone do that? Or rather, why would this individual do something like this? But then sometimes when we look back, or even when the psychologists look back, they realize that there are certain experiences that are embedded in our psyche, in this case in our subconscious, that have been the foundation
of our very psyche, yes.
Of our very psyche, and they have been the foundation of why we do certain things that we do.
Exactly.
And most of them, you know, in this world, like, now we're dealing with so many things. We deal with such, I'll just touch on this, for example, such things as abuse, serial killers. These are just extreme examples of what we do. But then what would have happened to a person? And in most aspects, it usually comes back to the traumatic experiences that happened, that might have happened, usually at a younger age, you know, to people. Then they would say, no, this is mostly associated with the traumatic experiences that people experience while they are young, right? So, seeing that this is so significant, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the drama that we experience when we're young, that has deposited, or rather that is sitting in our subconscious mind?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because, you know, the fact that there is the unconscious that is mostly saturated by our childhood traumatic experience, and that those experiences have an influence in how we behave in the state of our mind. Unfortunately, that sometimes has been used as a justification for condoning victims, as it were. So if, say, a child, for instance, takes a gun and shoots people, like what happens in mostly American schools, where someone just takes a gun and shoots everyone, they say, well, let's look at their background, their childhood background. Well, it's not them. It's the content which was consumed by them when they were young, or the content which they consumed when they were young. And I think that's where psychologists I part with psychology a bit, because if no one takes responsibility for their action because of the content of their because they have, and we say that no one is responsible because they've got content in their unconscious which they have consumed unknowingly, then we are producing victims all the time. So now then the question then that you're asking, then how do we deal with them traumatic experience? First of all, let me be clear, we are not denying that there is part of our childhood that is traumatic, and that makes us who we are. But then we are not completely exonerated or freed from responsibility because of our childhood traumatic experience. Because of we've got content that we are not aware of, it does not make us completely free to do anything and blame our childhood experience. For instance, if many people say, why are you a thug? I'm a thug because I grew up in a thug environment. No, that's shallow. Because yes, we understand that you've been influenced, but let us negate the idea of choice, or the fact of choice, that in all the consumption that you did of all the things which you've accumulated, whether being a thug, you also contributed by making the choice that when these things manifest, you did not say no. Because I think that is the power of reason. Because as much as the content from the unconscious surface, right, I think you have a gatekeeper for a reason, and which is why I think that the gatekeeper needs to be trained, that it does not only exercise tyranny, but it can also exercise guidance. Actually, that is the purpose of it, that it should provide guidance to say, well, this is coming out of your unconscious. You see, you saw this happening maybe in the movie or in your community, but no. You see, so now it needs to be trained. So now, how do we deal with that? Psychology would say, we need to confront the unconscious. We need to go there through talk therapy, visualization, and inner healing. Those are the methods that Freud suggested, that we can heal the inner, deeper psyche through inner healing and visualization and what was the third that I said? So it's inner healing, visualization,
therapy.
Therapy.
Talk.
So talk therapy. Thank you very much. Well, then you ask me, what do I think of these methods? Well,
are they helpful?
Are they useful?
Yeah.
How do you then go to the unconscious without being unconscious? You see, how do you...
That is $1 million question.
Yeah.
Like, how do you... There's a room that you're not aware of.
Yes.
How do you even go to that room, yet you
exactly.
are not even aware of it?
Exactly. You've put it precisely well. There's this dark room. How do you go there without being there? Well, if you go there, you're going to be unconscious. And this is what I feel that is flawed, that we can heal ourselves. In fact, let's start with, for instance, talk therapy. Talk, the power of speech. I agree. The best way to solve problems, talk about them with the people that you trust. Confess your faults to your friend. Feel better, right?
Yeah.
Say you've done something wrong. That causes trauma. You know it's going to go to the unconscious, and if you don't talk about it, it's going to come back.
Yeah.
Then talk about it. It's relieved through the power of speech. You talk, you feel better, right? Talk therapy, I agree. So you can even go to a point, that's why, in fact, there wouldn't have been all this social work if it wasn't for Freud. You go to a psychologist, what does the psychologist want to hear? They sit there and say it all. You see, you say all your problems there, and it's not necessarily that when people go to a psychologist they have psychological problems. It's because people have problems, generally.
Okay.
That's why they go to psychologists. You see, so now you talk it out. I agree. Inner healing intimates that you must reimagine, it's visualization actually, you must reimagine that childhood experience and try to reshape the events. You see, that's what I don't understand.
How is that? What do you think about that in particular?
I think, for instance, suppose you were raped in a particular room, then I'll say, Kananel, go back to that room. You see that room? You must feel the walls. That's more like hypnosis.
Yes.
So that's the question. How do you tap into the unconscious without being unconscious? So when that happens, I feel that you lose some of your consciousness. And when you lose consciousness, you don't know what might happen. I might, as a psychoanalyst or as a psychologist, implant any event there. So what I would say is that go back to that event, see that room, there you are, a little baby, there you are, and there is that man that's coming to rape you. Now, think of that man as someone that is coming to give you a hug. So it's more like relive those experiences in the past, and in those experiences change some scenery. So that is actually guided visualization.
Do we want to get a different outcome from the experience that you had, or do we want to get a different outcome in terms of how you perceive it?
Good question, because the fact of the matter is that you cannot really change what happened, but we are trying to change how you should perceive that event. So what we are doing here is that we are saying you can change that world. So imagine the rapist to be a loving father who's coming to give you a hug. In fact, what is interesting now in the today Christianity is that these methods are employed, and people are asked that they should imagine Jesus in those events. You see, so now I said that my problem with that is that the person that is guiding your visualization can bring any figure there and distort your experience altogether.
If I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, when you speak of hypnosis, and the redirecting of events. And then I have this psychoanalyst who comes into the room and they take me back to the experience. Do I trust them enough in regard to how my experience might be distorted or rather affected, even influenced regarding perhaps religious point of view, cultural, or moral-wise, what I consider as good, me as a person, you understand? So what is the assurance that when you let someone guide you through this experience, they will be completely in line with your personal inclination?
Exactly, because what you're raising is very true. It's a very important fact, because first of all, the person that's guiding you, they don't know all that you are. It could be that they say, imagine the rapist to be a man, and at that point you are fearful of all men. Imagine the person that's coming to rape you as just merely coming to give you a hug. Suppose you don't even hug. So that sort of replicates again the trauma that you're trying to redraw. It's like we're saying restructure that event, and by the way you are restructuring it with also things that threatens you, so you can never really heal. What's worse about that is that there is what is discovered lately called neuro signatures. Is that every time when you try to relive past experiences, you get the same emotional feedback that you got, which is why most people would cry when they think about the things they've done in the past or the things that was done upon them in the past.
Or the trauma in general.
The trauma in general. Why do you cry? It's because of when you picture the event in the neurons, in the mind.
Yeah.
Rather. Because the neurons are able to give you an emotional feedback as though it was real.
Yeah.
Then you are strengthening the same pathways that were made on that day of the event. So because the neurons cannot differentiate between the event being acted out or the actual event happening, which is why when if you are a man, and I'm going to give a very bad example, when you're a man, you're watching pornography, you get aroused, right? By seeing a naked woman. Why? Because the neurons cannot tell whether you are seeing the actual woman or you are just seeing it on screen. Or when you see people having sex, it cannot differentiate. That's the unconscious. It cannot differentiate whether it is you in the act or you are just seeing it. So the same thing happens when you rethink or visualize past traumatic experiences, is that you form the same cables that were formed when the event happened. So how is that healing?
And it sounds like now we are coming to a bit more problems than we started with.
Yeah.
Because it was about my next question to say, is that actually a pathway to healing?
No.
Because, or rather, in this aspect, are we actually paying enough respect to, or rather giving it enough thought? Because I'm thinking, if this is the way in which people are doing things in order to address such, is it just because it makes you feel, it makes you cry because you're thinking about it again? Is it that it's not healing?
Yeah, it's not healing.
Is it really that it's not healing, or is it that you're thinking about it, therefore you're confronting it, therefore it makes you sad?
Yeah, for me personally, I've never been in a guided visualization, but from understanding the science of neurosignatures and seeing how one would really cry when they rethink of the past events, it means that they are getting the same emotional feedback that they got from the event, and you don't want that.
So you're dealing with this over again as though it just happened.
Exactly, and that's actually, it might relieve you for a moment, but then the fact of the matter is that you are strengthening the old cords, which you would rather allow to heal, because neural pathways is the use it or lose it.
Yeah.
And that's actually how memory works, is that if you don't do something, for instance, if there's a practice that you've done in the past that you don't do now, you can't do it. You have to learn again because you want to construct that cord again. So even in traumatic experience, it's more like that. That's why they say time is a healer. Why? Because over time, you will heal. Unfortunately, traumatic experience, because they're high in emotions, the cord is thick, therefore it's difficult to break. June 16, Hector Peterson, we celebrate, we march, we toy, but we are not making progress. That's a dumb way to actually interpret history.
Yeah, Brandon.
It is dumb, because then you are not making any visions of the future from that history. You are not learning from that history. In fact, what you want is to relive that experience of trauma until you perfect it. And then what? So you're still licking the sores, and then you keep opening the sores every year on June 16.
Yeah, it sounds like basically what you're saying is that it doesn't help, rather it creates a cycle.
Yes.
It creates a cycle that is even more dangerous than first going through the trauma itself.
Exactly, yeah. Well,
but, I feel like all hope is not lost.
Yeah, well, I believe that too. As part of the reason why we are talking about this is because we know that there are people out there that are searching to hear something that's better. And we ourselves also, we think that something better can come out of this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we are also searching, aren't we? We can always be the better person tomorrow than we were today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I encourage everyone is talk about things. Talk therapy is good, but don't go back, lick the wounds. You don't just sit and agonize on your pain. Talking is the best way. In fact, people have no time for conversations these days because everyone gets home, they get glued in their altar, their television, and they see other people living their life. There's more to life than watching other people living it. And you see, in the past, depression was not so prominent because we sat around the fire and we talked about the day, we talked about the stories.
And
we
the
went
folk tales.
Exactly. And then we went to the farms, we worked together in a group. It was laughter, though it was hard work. And we came back and we enjoyed our meal, which we've worked so hard for. And there was no problem and there was no depression. But we have lost that because of the socio-economic transformation. But all hope is not lost, like you said. I do hope that we could emerge as this new generation that slays the giant.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Brendan, as always, this was so enlightening and insightful. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your insight with us.
Yes.
Here on Conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, really, all hope is not lost. It sounds like it's time that we lay our own dragon. So we can go back and talk to the people that we trust and address the issues and the things that have hurt us in the past. It is not excusable. We wish they did not happen. And yes, life is not fair. But we do have choices and we have the will. But most importantly, we have people that love us to the moon and back. And I hope you find the strength to slay that dragon. Thank you.
Thank you.